Why did she hesitate that morning, just for a heartbeat, before tightening her vest strap? No one noticed. Not the captain calling out positions. Not the gunners checking their ammo belts. Not even the young private joking about how quiet Fallujah felt today. But Maria Santos felt it. That small, instinctive pause. That flicker deep inside her chest, a whisper that something was off. The sun hung low over the rooftops, painting the city in sand-colored light. Dust clung to every surface. Even the air itself seemed heavy with it. The streets looked almost peaceful, children chasing a deflated soccer ball, vendors calling out prices, old men gathered in shaded corners pretending not to watch the convoy rolling past. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her Kevlar, feeling the weight of the medical bag pressing into her shoulder. The straps dug deep, leaving marks she'd long stopped noticing. 8 months in Iraq had burned away the idea of comfort. There was only routine now, the precision of preparation, the rituals before chaos. Every bandage, every vial, every syringe checked and rechecked. Her squad joked about it, how she treated her med pack like a holy relic. But when you'd seen men bleed out for lack of one clean tourniquet, organization wasn't a quirk. It was survival. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio, steady but distant. Alpha Company, keep your spacing tight. We're checking a compound simple sweep. Eyes open, no heroics. Simple sweep, Maria repeated under her breath. Those 2 words had cursed more soldiers than bullets ever had. 3 vehicles, 12 soldiers. A small mission, one that should have been over before the afternoon heat turned helmets into ovens. The intel looked clean. No enemy signatures, no chatter, no movement. Even the local police had vouched for the area. Too quiet, too calm, too clean. Maria had learned that the deadliest days often began exactly like this. She looked out through the armored window as the convoy rolled deeper into the district. A boy no older than 10 waved at them from a doorway. Maria lifted her hand slightly, an instinct more human than tactical, but the boy vanished back inside. That, she thought, was the first real warning. Her teammate, Corporal Johnson, caught her expression. "You got that feeling again, Doc?" Maria smirked, "The one that says I should have stayed in Texas." He laughed. "No, the one that saves our asses every time you get quiet." She didn't answer, just gave him a half-smile and looked ahead. The compound was coming up fast, 2 stories, concrete walls, the kind of middle-class Iraqi home that looked like every other in Fallujah, too normal to be safe. The lead vehicle slowed. Engines hummed in unison as the team prepared to dismount. Maria checked her weapon, then her medical kit again. The repetition wasn't nerves, it was focus. She learned long ago that fear could be a tool if you didn't let it own you. The radio popped again. "Overwatch in position, main team move." She stepped out into the blinding light, boots crunching on gravel. The air carried that strange stillness, the kind that comes before a storm or something worse. Even the usual street noises seemed to retreat. A stray dog barked somewhere in the distance, then silence. Captain Rodriguez gave a signal. The breach team moved forward, quick and silent. The rest of them spread out, covering angles. Maria positioned herself near the entrance, far enough to avoid the first blast, close enough to get to the wounded when it came. Because it always came. She took a slow breath, tasting the metallic edge of the air. Her pulse steadied. Her eyes swept the rooftops, the windows, the doorways. Nothing moved. "Stack ready," a soldier whispered. Rodriguez nodded. "Go." And then the world exploded. A thunderclap from beneath the lead vehicle threw dirt, metal, and human voices into the air. The truck lifted clean off the ground and came down on its side with a sound that cracked the sky. Dust and fire swallowed the street. Maria didn't think, she moved. Her legs carried her forward, before the echo of the blast had even died. Gunfire erupted, short, violent bursts from every direction. Windows flashed, rooftops spat fire. Civilians scattered, or maybe they weren't civilians at all. The street that had looked calm seconds ago now screamed with death. Ambush, contact front and flank. Rodriguez's voice tore through the radio, already drowned by the chaos. Maria hit the ground behind the overturned vehicle, coughing through smoke. She could hear screaming from inside, trapped voices, desperate and close. She crawled toward the wreck, glass and hot metal slicing her gloves. "Williams, Johnson, sound off," she shouted. A muffled voice answered, "In here, help." No time to think about cover. She got to her knees, pulling at the twisted hatch, hands burning from the heat. Every sound around her was a threat, bullets snapping, ricocheting, striking the hull like a drumbeat of violence. The air filled with dust, screams, and the sharp, rhythmic crack of enemy rifles. Someone yelled for a medic, not realizing the medic was already bleeding. The first bullet hit her shoulder, hard, sudden, shocking. It spun her sideways, tore fabric, skin, muscle. But she barely registered the pain. Williams was trapped inside. She could see his face through smoke, blood on his forehead, eyes wide and fatting. She dragged him out by his vest, teeth clenched, boots scraping across the dirt. "Stay with me," she gasped, dropping behind the wreck. Her training took over, hands steady despite the blood pooling around her. Pressure bandage, airway check, tourniquet. The rhythm of life and death played out on repeat. The radio screamed again, Rodriguez calling for backup, for air support, for anything. 30 minutes out, maybe more. In Fallujah, 30 minutes was a lifetime. Maria pressed a compress into Williams's wound, feeling her arm go numb. She tore at her own sleeve to make another bandage, sweat and blood blurring her vision. The ground shook again, more explosions. She could barely hear her own thoughts. Then another bullet. This one slammed into her thigh, dropping her to one knee. The pain was electric, burning, alive. She bit down hard, forced herself upright. "Not now," she muttered, almost a prayer. She crawled toward the wreck again. Johnson was still inside. Metal groaned under her hands. The stench of oil and burnt rubber filled her lungs. "Hang on, I'm coming," she yelled, not sure if he could hear. Her vision swam. Her leg wouldn't cooperate. Still, she reached inside, gripped the soldier's vest, and pulled with everything left in her. He screamed, his leg pinned under a seat frame. "Sorry," she whispered, voice cracking as she forced him free. When he came loose, he was bleeding heavily but alive. She dragged him back, collapsing beside the wreck. Then the third shot found her back. It felt like a punch from inside her body, stealing her breath. For a second everything went white, soundless, timeless. Then it all rushed back, the heat, the pain, the chaos. She fell forward, caught herself, kept working. Her fingers moved on their own, muscle memory overriding pain. She wrapped, pressed, tied. The world narrowed to hands and blood and the faint heartbeat beneath them. Rodriguez's voice broke through again, somewhere far off. "Hold your position, hold. Backup is en route." Maria looked up, saw the captain crouch 50 meters away behind a broken wall. Too far, too exposed. "Can't hold long," she whispered. "We're running out of time." Then another impact. Her left arm shattered mid-motion. The sound was like dry wood breaking. Her mind screamed, but her hands, her one good hand, kept moving. She switched grip, applied pressure to Johnson's wound with the last of her strength. Bullets hammered the metal above her head. The insurgents had realized who she was, the one keeping everyone alive. They were aiming for the medic now. She pressed harder, her own blood mixing with Johnson's, the dust turning crimson beneath them. Another shot. Her chest. This one was different, deep, heavy, final. The breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Every part of her training, every promise she'd made, every face she'd ever saved, they all fused into one single command. Keep them alive. The sound around her began to change, slower now, distorted, distant. Gunfire faded into echoes. The sky above her wavered, flickering between smoke and sunlight. She looked at Johnson, pale, trembling, alive. She looked at Williams, unconscious but still breathing. Her hands trembled as she reached for the next bandage. The 9th round slammed into her shoulder. The 10th into her ribs. The 11th, the one that should have ended everything, struck the back of her head and dropped her face first into the dirt. Silence. Real silence. No screams, no bullets, no sound but her own heartbeat fatting somewhere deep below the pain. She lay there, staring at the ground inches from her face. The dirt was soaked with her blood, dark and glistening. She tried to move, nothing responded. Her breath came shallow, irregular. She couldn't feel her legs, could barely feel her hands. Somewhere through the blur, she saw a shadow Johnson still alive, his chest rising faintly. Williams unmoving but not cold. And for reasons she didn't understand, Maria began to crawl. Her arm dragged her forward, 1 inch at a time. Her body broken, her purpose not. The radio crackled faintly beside her, Captain Rodriguez's voice a ghost through the static. Hold on, Santos, hold on. Her lips barely moved as she whispered back. Still working. Her eyes closed briefly, then opened again. Not yet. Not until they were safe. Not until her hands stopped shaking. Not until the oath was kept. Because in war, sometimes survival isn't about living. It's about not dying until the job is done. Why was she still crawling? No one could have blamed her for stopping. 11 bullets. A body more wound than flesh. But she kept moving, inch by inch, because 2 men were still breathing beside her. And she wasn't done yet. The world had shrunk to a tunnel of dust and blood. Every sound, every bullet crack, every scream seemed to echo from far away. She could no longer tell if she was awake or dreaming, alive or already gone. Her body had become foreign to her, unresponsive, heavy, numb. But her mind refused to surrender. She reached Johnson first. His skin was cold despite the desert heat, his pulse faint but there. Her fingers, shaking, bloody, half-numb, tore open what was left of her med kit. Supplies scattered around her like fallen leaves. Bandages soaked in her own blood, gauze blackened with soot. Still she found what she needed. A pressure wrap, a syringe of morphine, a will stronger than reason. Her hand trembled as she worked, but her movements were steady where it mattered. Every press, every knot, every breath was a battle against the darkness pulling her under. She whispered to him as she worked, her voice barely a breath. Stay with me, Johnson. You hear me? You stay with me. Don't let go yet. He didn't answer, but she imagined he heard her. Some part of him had to. Bullets still hissed through the air, but fewer now. The firefight had shifted, distant explosions, heavier weapons, echoes bouncing through narrow alleys. Captain Rodriguez's voice was somewhere in that chaos, calling coordinates, shouting for backup that might never come. Maria didn't listen for details anymore. She only listened for breathing. There's hers. The rhythm that still meant life. When she finally looked down, she realized she was sitting in a small pool of blood, her own. The sight didn't frighten her, it simply told her the truth. She didn't have long. Minutes maybe. But minutes were enough to save someone else. She turned her head slowly toward Williams. He was lying on his side, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. The head wound had swollen, a dark halo of blood matting his hair. She dragged herself toward him, one arm pulling, legs limp behind her. Every movement sent electric shocks through what was left of her nerves. She reached his face, brushed dirt from his eyelids. "Hey, Sergeant Williams," she whispered, "don't quit on me now. You hear that? You don't get to quit before I do." His eyes fluttered. For a moment she thought he might wake, but the moment passed and he slipped back into unconsciousness. Maria stared at him, at both of them, feeling the weight of silence pressing down. She wanted to scream. Not from pain, but from frustration, from the injustice of it. They had walked into this ambush blind, misled, unprotected. And now, in the heart of Fallujah, there was no cavalry coming. Not yet. Her radio crackled faintly at her hip. Static, voices fading in and out. Reinforcements, 2 clicks south, hold position. Hold position. She almost laughed, a short, broken sound that turned into a cough. "Yeah," she whispered, "holding." She tore a strip from her uniform and tied off her thigh where the bleeding was worst. Her vision dimmed, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She needed to stay conscious. Needed to think. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood. The pain snapped her focus back into place. Her training told her what to do. Her heart told her why. She couldn't save herself, not anymore. But she could buy them time. And so she worked. The minutes bled together. The sun crawled higher, then dipped again toward evening. Gunfire came and went in waves, some near, some far, some close enough to rattle the metal beside her ear. She didn't hide, didn't flinch. She was past fear now. Fear belonged to the living. By dusk, the gunfire had quieted. Smoke rose from ruined buildings, black plumes drifting into a burnt orange sky. The air smelled of cordite and sand, and something metallic, something final. Maria's breathing had grown shallow. Every inhale scraped her throat like broken glass. She had no sense of time anymore, only the rising chill of desert night creeping across her skin. Her lips were cracked, her tongue dry. She remembered water faintly, the cold taste from her canteen that morning, and almost smiled. Now she poured the last drop she could find onto a gauze pad and pressed it to Johnson's lips. "Here," she whispered, "you first." Somewhere behind her, Captain Rodriguez's rifle barked again, 3 sharp bursts. He was still alive. That thought gave her something to hold on to. The sky deepened to violet, then black. Fallujah's skyline glowed faintly with distant fires. The heat of the day vanished, replaced by a bone-cutting chill that seeped into the wounds she no longer felt. She shifted closer to Johnson, trying to share what little warmth her body had left. Her cheek rested against the dirt. She could hear his breathing, uneven, but steady enough to count. 1, 2, 3. She started counting their breaths like prayers. Each one meant she'd done something right. Each one meant she could let go just a little bit more. Then somewhere in the night, a low, distant rumble. Engines, heavy ones. She opened her eyes wide, heart stuttering in her chest. Was it rescue, or the enemy closing in? The sound grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath her. Tracks, not trucks. Tanks, maybe. American engines. Hope flared like a spark in dry grass. She reached for the radio with what little strength she had left. "Alpha, this is Santos." Static swallowed the rest. No response. She tried again, forcing air through her throat. "This is Medic Santos, convoy still alive." Her voice broke off, lost to the wind. But maybe someone heard, maybe not. Either way, she'd done her part. The minutes stretched into hours. Night deepened, stars emerging between drifting plumes of smoke. The gunfire returned in short bursts, then silence again. The enemy was out there, waiting, watching, conserving ammo. Maria closed her eyes, listening to the city breathe. She thought of Texas, of the long, flat fields and the smell of her father's barbecue pit after rain, of laughter, of safety, of things that didn't end with blood. It felt like another life, someone else's story. But that memory warmed her just enough to keep her eyes open. Johnson moaned softly beside her. She turned her head, every motion an effort. He was shivering violently now. Jacques. She reached out her arm, barely obeying, and pulled him closer. "Hey, it's okay," she murmured. "We're gonna get out of here, okay? You're not dying in this damn street." Her words were barely sound now, more breath than voice. But she said them anyway. Because sometimes hope needs to be spoken aloud, even when no one's left to hear it. Above, faint rotor blades whispered through the night. A helicopter. Then another. Her eyes widened, trying to focus on the sky. Tiny red lights blinked across the horizon, then disappeared. They were too far. Or maybe they were flying over another battle entirely. Fallujah was burning everywhere tonight. She wanted to believe they'd come back. That someone would see the flare she couldn't fire, the signal she couldn't send. But she knew better. She'd been a medic long enough to understand the odds. Still, she smiled. A cracked, blood-streaked smile that belonged more to defiance than faith. Because even if help never came, she'd kept them alive longer than anyone thought possible. The hours passed. Her mind drifted in and out like a tide. At times she was back home, standing in her mother's kitchen with sunlight pouring through the window. At others she was on a battlefield with no sky at all, just noise, light, and the smell of death. She spoke to both soldiers even when she wasn't sure she still had a voice. Talked about home, about music, about a dog she didn't even own anymore. Anything to keep them tethered. Anything to remind herself that she was still here. Sometime near midnight, the city changed again. Distant engines, the sound of tracks grinding over asphalt. And then, the unmistakable roar of American heavy artillery. Her fatting pulse quickened. They were coming. They had to be. She turned her head toward the sound, tears forming in the corners of her eyes, not from emotion, but from exhaustion too deep to name. "Almost there," she whispered, "just almost." A new firefight erupted blocks away. Muzzle flashes danced along rooftops, brief lightning in the black sky. The rumble of aircraft followed, deep, thunderous, relentless. Somewhere beyond her vision, the city shook. Maria pressed her forehead against the dirt and let the vibration roll through her. It felt like life. Like the world refusing to end. She could no longer lift her head, could barely draw breath. But in her mind, she repeated one last order to herself, to her body, to the universe. Keep them breathing. Everything else could fade. Her pain, her fear, even her heartbeat. But not them. Her radio hissed one last time, a broken voice barely audible through static. "Back up, 20 minutes out, hold if you can." 20 minutes. She smiled faintly. She could hold 20 minutes. Maybe. The darkness around her shifted again, deepened. Her eyes flickered open and closed like dying flames. When they opened again, she saw movement, shadows along the walls, shifting shapes under the moonlight. She reached for her weapon out of reflex, but her hand refused to close. Her mind screamed for her to stay awake, but her body was finally surrendering. The world tilted, edges blurring. Her last thought before the blackness took her was simple, wordless, pure. It wasn't fear or regret. It was a promise. Not while they're still breathing. And then silence again. The kind that only war can make. Why was she still crawling? No one could have blamed her for stopping. 11 bullets. A body more wound than flesh. But she kept moving, inch by inch, because 2 men were still breathing beside her. And she wasn't done yet. The world had shrunk to a tunnel of dust and blood. Every sound, every bullet crack, Every scream seemed to echo from far away. She could no longer tell if she was awake or dreaming, alive or already gone. Her body had become foreign to her, unresponsive, heavy, numb. But her mind refused to surrender. She reached Johnson first. His skin was cold despite the desert heat, his pulse faint but there. Her fingers, shaking, bloody, half-numb, tore open what was left of her med kit. Supplies scattered around her like fallen leaves. Bandages soaked in her own blood, gauze blackened with soot. Still, she found what she needed: a pressure wrap, a syringe of morphine, a will stronger than reason. Her hand trembled as she worked, but her movements were steady where it mattered. Every press, every knot, every breath was a battle against the darkness pulling her under. She whispered to him as she worked, her voice barely a breath. "Stay with me, Johnson. You hear me? You stay with me. Don't let go yet." He didn't answer, but she imagined he heard her. Some part of him had to. Bullets still hissed through the air, but fewer now. The firefight had shifted, distant explosions, heavier weapons, echoes bouncing through narrow alleys. Captain Rodriguez's voice was somewhere in that chaos, calling coordinates, shouting for backup that might never come. Maria didn't listen for details anymore. She only listened for breathing. Theirs, hers. The rhythm that still meant life. When she finally looked down, she realized she was sitting in a small pool of blood, her own. The sight didn't frighten her, it simply told her the truth. She didn't have long. Minutes maybe. But minutes were enough to save someone else. She turned her head slowly toward Williams. He was lying on his side, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. The head wound had swollen, a dark halo of blood matting his hair. She dragged herself toward him, one arm pulling, legs limp behind her. Every movement sent electric shocks through what was left of her nerves. She reached his face, brushed dirt from his eyelids. "Hey, Sergeant Williams," she whispered, "don't quit on me now. You hear that? You don't get to quit before I do." His eyes fluttered. For a moment she thought he might wake, but the moment passed and he slipped back into unconsciousness. Maria stared at him, at both of them, feeling the weight of silence pressing down. She wanted to scream. Not from pain, but from frustration, from the injustice of it. They had walked into this ambush blind, misled, unprotected. And now, in the heart of Fallujah, there was no cavalry coming. Not yet. Her radio crackled faintly at her hip. Static, voices fading in and out. Reinforcements, 2 clicks south, hold position. Hold position. She almost laughed, a short, broken sound that turned into a cough. "Yeah," she whispered, "holding." She tore a strip from her uniform and tied off her thigh where the bleeding was worst. Her vision dimmed, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She needed to stay conscious. Needed to think. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood. The pain snapped her focus back into place. Her training told her what to do. Her heart told her why. She couldn't save herself, not anymore. But she could buy them time. And so she worked. The minutes bled together. The sun crawled higher, then dipped again toward evening. Gunfire came and went in waves, some near, some far, some close enough to rattle the metal beside her ear. She didn't hide, didn't flinch. She was past fear now. Fear belonged to the living. By dusk, the gunfire had quieted. Smoke rose from ruined buildings, black plumes drifting into a burnt-orange sky. The air smelled of cordite and sand, and something metallic, something final. Maria's breathing had grown shallow. Every inhale scraped her throat like broken glass. She had no sense of time anymore, only the rising chill of desert night creeping across her skin. Her lips were cracked, her tongue dry. She remembered water faintly, the cold taste from her canteen that morning, and almost smiled. Now she poured the last drop she could find onto a gauze pad and pressed it to Johnson's lips. "Here," she whispered, "you first." Somewhere behind her, Captain Rodriguez's rifle barked again, 3 sharp bursts. He was still alive. That thought gave her something to hold on to. The sky deepened to violet, then black. Falluja's skyline glowed faintly with distant fires. The heat of the day vanished, replaced by a bone-cutting chill that seeped into the wounds she no longer felt. She shifted closer to Johnson, trying to share what little warmth her body had left. Her cheek rested against the dirt. She could hear his breathing, uneven, but steady enough to count. 1, 2, 3. She started counting their breaths like prayers. Each one meant she'd done something right. Each one meant she could let go just a little bit more. Then somewhere in the night, a low, distant rumble. Engines, heavy ones. She opened her eyes wide, heart stuttering in her chest. Was it rescue, or the enemy closing in? The sound grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath her. Drags, not drugs. Tanks, maybe. American engines. Hope flared like a spark in dry grass. She reached for the radio with what little strength she had left. "Alpha, this is Santos." Static swallowed the rest. No response. She tried again, forcing air through her throat. "This is Medic Santos, convoy still alive." Her voice broke off, lost to the wind. But maybe someone heard, maybe not. Either way, she'd done her part. The minutes stretched into hours. Night deepened, stars emerging between drifting plumes of smoke. The gunfire returned in short bursts, then silence again. The enemy was out there, waiting, watching, conserving ammo. Maria closed her eyes, listening to the city breathe. She thought of Texas, of the long, flat fields and the smell of her father's barbecue pit after rain, of laughter, of safety, of things that didn't end with blood. It felt like another life, someone else's story. But that memory warmed her just enough to keep her eyes open. Johnson moaned softly beside her. She turned her head, every motion an effort. He was shivering violently now. "Jacques." She reached out her arm, barely obeying, and pulled him closer. "Hey, it's okay," she murmured. "We're gonna get out of here, okay? You're not dying in this damn street." Her words were barely sound now, more breath than voice. But she said them anyway. Because sometimes hope needs to be spoken aloud, even when no one's left to hear it. Above, faint rotor blades whispered through the night. A helicopter. Then another. Her eyes widened, trying to focus on the sky. Tiny red lights blinked across the horizon, then disappeared. They were too far. Or maybe they were flying over another battle entirely. Fallujah was burning everywhere tonight. She wanted to believe they'd come back. That someone would see the flare she couldn't fire, the signal she couldn't send. But she knew better. She'd been a medic long enough to understand the odds. Still, she smiled. A cracked, blood-streaked smile that belonged more to defiance than faith. Because even if help never came, she'd kept them alive longer than anyone thought possible. The hours passed. Her mind drifted in and out like a tide. At times she was back home, standing in her mother's kitchen with sunlight pouring through the window. At others she was on a battlefield with no sky at all, just noise, light, and the smell of death. She spoke to both soldiers even when she wasn't sure she still had a voice. Talked about home, about music, about a dog she didn't even own anymore. Anything to keep them tethered. Anything to remind herself that she was still here. Sometime near midnight, the city changed again. Distant engines, the sound of tracks grinding over asphalt. And then, the unmistakable roar of American heavy artillery. Her fatting pulse quickened. They were coming. They had to be. She turned her head toward the sound, tears forming in the corners of her eyes, not from emotion, but from exhaustion too deep to name. "Almost there," she whispered, "just almost." A new firefight erupted blocks away. Muzzle flashes danced along rooftops, brief lightning in the black sky. The rumble of aircraft followed, deep, thunderous, relentless. Somewhere beyond her vision, the city shook. Maria pressed her forehead against the dirt and let the vibration roll through her. It felt like life, like the world refusing to end. She could no longer lift her head, could barely draw breath. But in her mind, she repeated one last order to herself, to her body, to the universe. Keep them breathing. Everything else could fade. Her pain, her fear, even her heartbeat. But not them. Her radio hissed one last time, a broken voice barely audible through static. "Back up, 20 minutes out, hold if you can." 20 minutes. She smiled faintly. She could hold 20 minutes. Maybe. The darkness around her shifted again, deepened. Her eyes flickered open and closed like dying flames. When they opened again, she saw movement, shadows along the walls, shifting shapes under the moonlight. She reached for her weapon out of reflex, but her hand refused to close. Her mind screamed for her to stay awake, but her body was finally surrendering. The world tilted, edges blurring. Her last thought before the blackness took her was simple, wordless, pure. It wasn't fear or regret. It was a promise. Not while they're still breathing. And then silence again. The kind that only war can make. Why did the dawn feel heavier than night? Because it brought light and with it truth. The kind of truth that stripped away illusions, left no room for hope too fragile to survive the daylight. The first thing Maria Santos felt when she woke was the cold. It wasn't the chill of desert air. It was deeper, the kind that started inside, in the places where blood no longer reached. Her skin was pale beneath the grime, lips cracked, eyes sunken and unfocused. She didn't remember falling asleep. Didn't remember the moment her body finally gave up its fight to stay conscious. But somehow, through shock and pain and blood loss, she had made it through the night. Her ears still rang with distant explosions. Fallujah hadn't slept. Somewhere beyond the ruined walls, the battle had spread like wildfire, gunfire rolling across the city in long, echoing bursts. She turned her head, every muscle screaming in protest. Johnson was still breathing faint, uneven but alive. Williams, too, his chest rising slowly beneath the torn remains of his uniform. They survived the night because she hadn't let herself die. She tried to sit up but couldn't. Her body refused the command. So she crawled instead, dragging herself an inch at a time toward the medical bag that lay open a few feet away. Every movement sent a pulse of white-hot pain through her shattered spine. When she reached the bag, half its contents were gone, scattered, ruined by dirt soaked in blood. Still, she found what mattered: a single sealed bandage, a syringe, a ragged strip of gauze that might as well have been gold. Her fingers shook violently as she worked. It wasn't precision anymore, it was desperation. Her vision blurred in and out, scenes fading between now and memory. Texas sunlight on her face. Her mother calling her name from a porch. The smell of grilled corn and smoke. Then the street again, gray and silent, the sky already turning white with heat. She bit her lip to anchor herself. The pain brought her back. She wasn't done yet. Rodriguez's voice was gone from the radio. Only static now. The kind of static that filled a void where hope used to live. She adjusted the tourniquet on Johnson's leg, whispering to him even though he couldn't answer. "Don't you dare leave me here, you stubborn bastard. You're gonna walk out of this. Both of you will." Her voice was soft, frayed, but steady. The same tone she'd used for patients back in field hospitals. The voice that said, "You're not dying today." Above them, the sky shimmered, the kind of heat haze that made the world look like a mirage. And maybe it was. Maybe the line between reality and hallucination had already begun to blur. From somewhere distant, the low thrum of engines. Then aircraft. Helicopters. Her heart stuttered. She looked up through the dust, eyes straining to focus. Two black dots grew larger across the horizon, circling high. "Come on," she whispered. "See us, please see us." But the choppers never slowed. They hovered, scanned, then veered north toward heavier fighting. Too dangerous here. Too many anti-air weapons still hidden in the city. They were saving others, or maybe saving themselves. Maria watched them fade into the glare until her vision swam again. A dry sob escaped her throat. Not from despair, from exhaustion beyond measure. She looked down at her hands. They didn't feel like hers anymore, swollen, streaked with blood that had long since dried to a rusty brown. When she tried to flex her fingers, they barely moved. Her mouth was so dry she could no longer swallow. Her canteen was empty. The water she'd saved for the others was gone, given away drop by drop. She hadn't taken a sip since yesterday morning. The human body can survive days without food. Without water, only hours. She knew the numbers. She'd memorized them in training. Now she was living them. A single thought pulsed in her head, steady and mechanical. Keep breathing, keep them breathing, don't stop. She began talking again softly, to no one and to everyone. "Hey Johnson, I ever tell you about my dad's truck? Old Ford, blue paint, rust on the sides. Thing rattled like a washing machine, but it got us everywhere we needed to go." Her voice trembled. The words weren't stories anymore. They were anchors, things to hold onto so her mind didn't drift too far. The sound of battle drew closer again. Automatic fire, RPGs, the distant thump of mortars. It wasn't over. Not even close. She could hear voices now, shouts in Arabic, the bark of commands. Enemy fighters, maybe 30 or 40 meters away, moving between buildings. They were hunting. Maria froze. She couldn't fight, couldn't even crawl fast enough to hide. All she could do was pray they didn't notice the wreckage, or the faint sound of 3 broken soldiers still breathing beneath it. Her heart hammered painfully. Every breath threatened to betray their position. She pressed her face into the dirt, eyes shut tight. Time slowed to seconds, each one longer than the last. Footsteps. Voices. Closer. Then silence again. And when she finally dared to lift her head, they were gone. She exhaled a shaking breath. Tears slipped down her cheeks without permission. Not from fear. From sheer relief. But relief was a luxury she couldn't afford. She forced herself to keep working, checking pulses, repositioning bodies, tightening bandages. It was madness, probably. She had no strength left to save anyone. But it gave her purpose. As the hours dragged on, the sun became an enemy of its own. Its heat pressed down like a weight, turning the air into something you could choke on. The smell of death burnt fuel, sweat, iron, thickened with every passing minute. She tore a sleeve from her uniform and tried to shield their faces. Her own skin blistered under the light. The world shimmered, tilted, and drifted away. When she came to again, it was night. No memory of how many hours had passed. Only darkness, cold, and the faint glow of fires still burning blocks away. The pain had become something distant, detached, not gone, just quieter. She couldn't feel her legs at all now. Couldn't lift her head without dizziness flooding in. But her hearing still worked. And through the quiet she caught it, the distant rumble of engines again. This time heavier, slower, deliberate. Tanks. American ones. She could tell by the rhythm of the treads, the distinct metallic churn she'd heard 100 times before. For a moment, she thought it was another hallucination. But then she saw it, faint light flickering through the haze, the low hum of radio chatter breaking across static. They were coming. Her hand reached instinctively for her radio. She clicked it once, twice, praying for a signal. Static answered. She tried again. "This is Staff Sergeant Santos. Alpha Company 2 wounded, need evac." Her words slurred, fatting out mid-sentence. She couldn't even tell if the mic was transmitting. But she said it again anyway. Because sometimes the act of calling for help is what keeps you alive. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The sound of battle grew louder. Closer. Then the sky tore open. The first artillery shells screamed overhead, their shockwaves rolling through the street like thunder. The air filled with the smell of cordite and dust. Maria pressed her face into the ground as debris rained down. When she looked up, the world had changed. The insurgent positions that had trapped them for 2 days were erupting in fire and smoke. American gunships had arrived, heavy, precise, merciless. She couldn't see them, but she could feel them, the deep pulse of rotor blades beating through the air like a heartbeat. For the first time in 36 hours, the sound of gunfire was music. She tried to lift her arm, to wave, to signal. But her body refused. She settled for whispering the words instead. "Over here, we're here." No one could hear her. But above the roar of engines, she swore she heard another voice, faint, distant, through the static of her radio. "Hold on, we're coming." Her chest tightened. Her pulse quickened, though she barely felt it. They'd heard her. She closed her eyes, tears mingling with blood and dust. Relief flooded through her, heavy, disorienting, almost painful. After 48 hours of hell, someone was finally coming. She looked at Johnson, at Williams, their faces ghostly pale but still alive. She wanted to tell them it was over, that they'd made it. But her voice failed her. So she just reached out, her hand trembling, and touched their shoulders. The city roared with explosions. Light flashed across the skyline as helicopters fired into enemy strongholds. The air vibrated with power and chaos, but to Maria it sounded like peace. Her vision dimmed again. The last thing she saw before blacking out was a beam of light cutting through the smoke, a helicopter searchlight sweeping across the wreckage. It stopped. Right on her. And then darkness. But this time it felt different. Not empty. Not final. This time the darkness felt like rest. Like maybe, finally, she could let go because someone else was taking over. What does rescue sound like after 48 hours of silence? Not like music. Not like triumph. It sounds like thunder in the bones, distant, disciplined, and dangerous. Maria Santos heard it first as vibration through the ground. The faint tremor of engines, the deep, rhythmic chop of helicopter rotors slicing the air. She thought it might be another hallucination, her mind replaying a sound she'd dreamed of hearing. But then the earth itself began to shake. And through the fog of her consciousness came a new noise, sharp, controlled bursts of gunfire. Different from the wild chaos of the ambush. Precise, professional. Not insurgents. Americans. Her eyes flickered open. The night sky was alive with movement. Shadows swept through the smoke, green lights flashing briefly before vanishing again. Voices, low, steady, commanding. Stack up left. 2 on overwatch. Contact front, 3 hostiles. Navy SEALs. She recognized the tone, the calm in the storm, the methodical rhythm of men who had done this 100 times before. Somewhere in the chaos, a flare burst above the rooftops, a blossom of white light that turned the ruined street into ghostly daylight. For a moment she saw them clearly. figures moving like smoke, fast, silent, deliberate. One of them knelt beside her. A gloved hand brushed dust from her face. A voice low but firm. "Medics alive, multiple GSWs, Jesus, she's still breathing." Maria tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. "They need help." The words were sand in her throat. "We've got them," the voice said. "Hold tight." He turned, motioning to another shadow. "Doc, over here." Footsteps, the metallic clink of gear. Then another voice, younger, urgent. "Holy hell, she's got 11 entry wounds." The first man again, the one who'd found her. "Then she's earned her ride home. Move." The SEAL medic dropped beside her, his movements quick and efficient. Hands checking vitals, eyes scanning wounds, voice steady but tight. "Pulse weak but present, BP low, we need a bird now." Static on the radio, then a response crisp, controlled. "LZ marked, 60 seconds out." Maria drifted in and out, consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. Through the haze, she saw flashes of motion, the SEALs forming a perimeter, their rifles tracking invisible threats in the darkness. She could hear the whisper of suppressed gunfire, the muted thump of grenades clearing doorways. They moved with lethal precision, every step measured, every breath purposeful. And yet, amid the chaos, one of them knelt beside her again, a hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Stay with us, Sergeant, you're going home." Home. The word hit her like an echo from a forgotten life. Her eyes fluttered open again. Williams was being lifted onto a stretcher, his head bandaged, his face ghost pale but alive. Johnson followed, limp but breathing. Maria felt tears she couldn't wipe away slide down the sides of her face. They made it. That was all that mattered. A spotlight cut through the smoke, the extraction helicopter hovering above, its downdraft whipping dust and debris into a storm. The air screamed with power. Rotor blades hammered the night as the SEALs moved fast, coordinating through gestures and clipped commands. "Go, go, go." "Security rear." "Casualties up first." The medic tightened a tourniquet on Maria's leg, his hands quick but careful. "She's losing blood fast. We've got minutes." The team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, crouched beside them, his face shadowed beneath night vision goggles. He glanced at the medic, then down at Maria. "She conscious?" "Barely." "Then she's hearing me." He leaned closer, his voice calm but iron steady. "You did good, Sergeant, real good. You saved them. We're here to get you out." Maria blinked up at him, her vision swimming between focus and blur. The face above her shifted like a dream, a stranger's voice, a familiar promise. She wanted to answer, to tell him she wasn't finished yet. But her mouth refused to move. So she did the only thing she could. She blinked once. Slow, deliberate. Morrison nodded, he understood. Gunfire erupted again from the rooftops, sudden, sharp, close. The SEALs reacted instantly, returning fire with controlled bursts. Tracer rounds carved red arcs through the air. Contact left. Suppressing. LZ compromised, we're taking fire. Morrison keyed his mic. Eagle 1 adjust pattern, we're hot down here. The helicopter pivoted, side-mounted miniguns unleashing hell across the street. The air roared, windows shattered, dust and fire swallowed everything. But the SEALs held their ground. Casualty 1 loaded. Casualty 2 loaded. Get the medic on deck. Maria felt hands under her shoulders, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. Every movement ripped through her nerves, but she didn't cry out. She couldn't. The rotor wash blasted her face as they carried her through the chaos. The world blurred, flashes of light, dark silhouettes, the metallic taste of blood and smoke. Then the helicopter bay door. Hands guiding her inside. voices shouting over the roar of engines. Go, go, we're clear. As the chopper lifted off, Maria's world tilted. The city below shrank into a mosaic of fire and shadow. Through half-closed eyes, she saw Fallujah burning, not as a battlefield but as a graveyard of promises. The medic leaned over her, shouting to be heard. Stay awake, Santos. You made it, you hear me? Stay awake. She tried. God, she tried. But her body was done. She looked at him, lips barely moving. Did they make it? He smiled, a quick, fierce thing that didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, they made it because of you. The words sank deep, wrapping around the pain like balm. Maria exhaled slowly, her eyes closing. The medic's voice faded. The roar of the rotors softened. And for the first time in 2 days, she let herself fall into the darkness, not from fear, but from peace. When she woke again, everything was white. The hum of machinery, the beeping rhythm of monitors, the sterile scent of antiseptic and gauze. Hospital. She wasn't sure if it was real at first. The light was too soft, the air too clean. Then a voice, calm, feminine, professional. You're safe, Staff Sergeant. Don't try to move. Maria's eyes focused slowly. A woman in surgical scrubs leaned over her, checking vitals. Where? Military trauma unit, the doctor said. You've been in surgery for 18 hours. You're lucky to be alive. Maria blinked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Johnson, Williams. The doctor smiled faintly. Both alive, both stable, you saved them. The words didn't sink in right away. Alive. Stable. She turned her head slightly, every motion a knife through her body, and saw 2 other beds beyond the curtain. Machines, monitors, beeping heartbeats. Relief hit her like a wave. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down silently. It wasn't victory, it wasn't joy. It was release, the slow unwinding of something she'd been holding inside for too long. Her voice came out as a rasp. How long? The doctor hesitated, 2 days after the ambush. Maria frowned weakly. I thought I didn't think I'd make it. The doctor smiled. Neither did we. 11 bullet wounds, massive trauma, full system shock, but somehow you refused to die. Maria tried to smile but couldn't. Instead, she whispered, couldn't leave them. The doctor nodded softly. No, you didn't. Later that night, Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood at the foot of her bed. His uniform was dust-streaked, his expression unreadable. He waited until she noticed him, then said quietly, You remember me. Her voice was faint. You're the one who found me. He gave a small nod. We'd been tracking your radio signal for hours. We thought we were too late. He paused, studying her face. You fought harder than anyone I've ever seen. Maria looked away. Didn't feel like fighting, just doing my job. Morrison's gaze softened. Sometimes that's the same thing. They stood in silence for a moment, a soldier and the woman whose endurance had redefined it. Finally, he said, My team wanted me to tell you something. They don't say this often, but you earned it. He leaned closer, voice low and steady. Respect. Maria's eyes glistened. She nodded once, a tear slipping free. Tell them thank you for coming back for us. Morrison's jaw tightened. We never leave our own. He turned to go, then hesitated. You should know your actions saved more than 2 lives out there. When we pulled your transmission logs, Command rerouted multiple units based on your last call. You gave them coordinates, even while you were bleeding out. You helped end that entire ambush. Maria stared at him, the weight of it sinking in slowly. I don't remember doing that. He smiled faintly. Sometimes courage happens when we're too broken to notice. He saluted her, a crisp, silent gesture, then walked out. In the days that followed, Maria drifted between sleep and memory. Doctors moved around her like ghosts. Nurses whispered in languages of medicine and mercy. She lost track of time. But one evening, the sound of boots on tile drew her eyes to the doorway. Johnson and Williams stood there, pale, bandaged, limping, but alive. Williams grinned weakly. "Heard the doc say you took 11 rounds, ma'am. You showing off or something?" Maria laughed, a dry, cracked sound, but real. "You owe me a new med kit." Johnson nodded, voice trembling. "You saved my life." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "No, you saved mine. I just refused to stop working." They stood in silence, 3 soldiers bound not by orders or ranks, but by survival. By the kind of loyalty that doesn't need words. When they left, Maria turned her head toward the window. Outside, the desert stretched to the horizon, quiet, endless, golden under the setting sun. She thought of Fallujah, the dust, the screams, the fire, and then of silence. The kind that follows when death passes you by. Her heart slowed, steady now, unhurried. She whispered to no one, to everyone, to the air itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And somewhere deep inside, the sound of rotor blades faded into memory, the heartbeat of a promise kept. How do you come home from something you never left? For Maria Santos, recovery wasn't a hallway in a hospital or a series of surgeries. It was a battlefield of its own, silent, invisible, endless. She woke every morning to the same rhythm, the slow beep of a monitor, the hiss of oxygen, the ache of scars still healing. The doctors called her lucky. The nurses called her brave. But when the lights dimmed at night and the machines hummed their mechanical lullaby, Maria knew the truth. She hadn't survived. She'd simply kept living. 8 weeks in a trauma ward taught her what silence could do to a soldier's mind. The walls were too white, too clean. The air smelled of disinfectant and absence. Every sound, a footstep, a curtain drawn made her flinch, her body still wired for chaos. Sometimes when sleep took her, she'd wake in a cold sweat, the sound of gunfire still echoing through her chest. She'd reach for her rifle before remembering it wasn't there. Only tubes, bandages, the sterile calm of survival. One night a nurse found her sitting upright, eyes open but unfocused. "You're safe," the nurse whispered gently. "You're back home." Maria didn't answer. She just stared past her to a place only she could see. The dusty street. The overturned vehicle. Johnson's shallow breathing. She could still smell the blood. Still feel the weight of a broken body crawling toward life. Weeks turned into months. Physical therapy came next, brutal, necessary, endless. Her left arm was a puzzle of plates and screws. Her leg barely worked. Every step was fire, every movement a reminder. The therapists pushed her, encouraged her, cheered her progress. But progress wasn't the problem. Purpose was. She'd been trained to run toward gunfire, to patch holes in bodies while ignoring her own. Now they wanted her to walk on a treadmill and breathe slowly. "Start with one more step," her therapist said one morning, watching the tremor in her reconstructed leg. "One more step," Maria repeated like it was a prayer. She took it slow, shaky, painful. Then another. Her reflection in the mirror didn't look like her anymore. The scars ran deep, pink, uneven, brutal. Her body was a map of every decision she'd made, every life she'd refused to let die. She stared at herself for a long time, breathing hard. "Is this what survival looks like?" she whispered. The therapist didn't answer. Some questions weren't meant to be. Outside her room, the base moved on. New deployments, new faces. Different wars in different deserts. But her war was still the same, a loop she couldn't escape. Every morning she woke in safety, but her mind stayed behind that wall in Fallujah. Rodriguez visited once before he rotated stateside. He stood awkwardly by her bed, his voice thick with the kind of gratitude soldiers don't know how to say. "You saved my men," he said. "You saved us." Maria smiled faintly. "They saved me too." He nodded. "Command, recommending you for the Silver Star. It's already gone up the chain." Her brow furrowed. "For what? I was just doing my job." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "That is the job, Santos. You stayed when most wouldn't have survived 10 seconds. That counts." She didn't argue. She just nodded, though her eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the desert stretched endless and indifferent. Awards couldn't fill the silence it left behind. A month later, she stood for the first time without the crutch. The physical therapist clapped quietly, smiling. Maria didn't. The act of standing didn't feel like victory. It felt like remembering the moment before the bullet hit, the moment she thought she was still invincible. She walked out onto the hospital balcony that afternoon, her steps slow and uneven. The sunlight hit her face bright, warm, merciless. For a second, it smelled like Iraq again. Dust and sweat and sunlight. And then, without meaning to, she cried. Not loud, not wild. Just a slow, quiet surrender, tears slipping down scars that hadn't yet faded. She wasn't mourning the pain. She was mourning the woman she'd been before it. When she was cleared for discharge, they offered her a choice: medical retirement or limited duty stateside. Teaching training. No more combat. She signed the papers without hesitation. Combat had already taken everything it wanted from her. They sent her to Fort Sam Houston, the same place she'd trained years ago. Only now she wasn't the student. She was the example. Her first day in the classroom, 30 recruits sat in front of her, fresh-faced, nervous, full of that eager energy soldiers have before reality teaches them what fear costs. She stood at the front, her uniform sharp, her scars hidden beneath sleeves. "This," she said, holding up a trauma kit, "is the difference between life and death, between doing your job and losing someone who shouldn't have been lost." Her voice didn't shake. But her hand, the one that had wrapped bandages in the dirt of Fallujah, trembled just slightly. The recruits didn't notice. Or maybe they did. Either way, they listened. She told them about the basics: bleeding control, airway management, field stabilization. But she didn't tell them about the silence after the firefight, or how it felt to count your own heartbeats while waiting to die. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. When class ended, one of the younger soldiers approached her. "Ma'am," he said shyly, "they said you took 11 rounds and kept working. That true?" Maria met his eyes. "For 48 hours, she said, "but that's not the part that matters." He frowned. "What does?" "That I didn't stop." The recruit nodded, unsure how to respond. Maria smiled faintly. "You'll understand one day." At night, when the hallways went quiet, she sat by her window overlooking the base. The sound of helicopters in training still reached her room, faint echoes from a world she used to belong to. Each time she heard them, her pulse changed, faster, sharper, alive. Her body still remembered the rhythm. Her mind remembered everything else. Sometimes she closed her eyes and pretended she was back there, not in the pain, but in the purpose. The clarity of it. The way life made sense when the only goal was to keep someone breathing. Civilian life didn't have that kind of clarity. Neither did recovery. One evening, she found a letter slipped under her door. It was from Lieutenant Commander Morrison. The handwriting was sharp, clean, deliberate. "Sergeant Santos, thought you should know both of your men made full recoveries. Williams is back in rotation. Johnson's finishing therapy. The story of Fallujah's medic's been passed around every unit I know. You reminded a lot of us what endurance really looks like. Respectfully, Morrison." Maria read it twice. then folded it carefully and placed it in her duffel, between her service tags and a faded photo of her team. That night she dreamed of the rescue again. Not the pain, not the blood, just the sound of boots approaching, the hand on her shoulder, the voice saying, "You're going home." Weeks turned into months. Her scars began to fade, though some never would. The nightmares came less often, but they never left completely. She learned to live with them, to breathe through the flashes of memory, to let them pass like weather. Pain wasn't something you erased. It was something you learned to walk with. One day after class, she found herself in the base chapel, empty, quiet, still smelling faintly of wax and dust. She sat in the back pew, her uniform crisp, her posture straight. She hadn't prayed in years. But now she did. Not for herself. For the men who hadn't come home. For the ones she couldn't save. For the silence she carried like a second heartbeat. Her voice was barely audible. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me finish the job." Tears came again, the kind that didn't sting, only softened. When she left, the sun was setting. A golden line stretched across the sky, the same color as the dust that once covered her in Fallujah. She stopped at the edge of the walkway, eyes closed, feeling the warmth against her face. She could almost hear the city again. The wind between ruined walls. The faint pulse of rotor blades far above. For a moment she smiled, not in pride but in peace. Because she understood now that survival wasn't about living through war. It was about learning how to live after it. And though the battlefield had taken nearly everything, it had given her something back too. Clarity, purpose, the quiet strength of knowing what she was capable of when the world fell apart. That night, as the base lights flickered on and the hum of aircraft faded into the dark, Maria whispered one final thought to the stillness around her. Sometimes, the loudest victories are the ones no one sees. And somewhere in the distance, a helicopter passed overhead, steady, powerful, unbroken. A reminder that some echoes never fade. Why do some questions follow you longer than a war ever could? Maria Santos asked herself that every morning she woke in peace and felt guilty for it. She'd healed enough to walk without a limp now. The doctors said her body had recovered remarkably. But they couldn't measure the damage left behind in silence. Fallujah still lived under her skin. In her pulse, in her sleep. Every flash of light, every slammed door. It wasn't fear anymore, it was memory, stitched into bone. She returned to teaching full-time at Fort Sam Houston, molding recruits into medics who would someday walk into hell carrying nothing but faith in their hands. They called her ma'am. They saluted. But she never felt like an officer. She still felt like the woman crawling through dust, counting breaths that weren't hers. The Army loved stories like hers, the survivor, the hero, the miracle. But she didn't. Because behind every medal was a moment she wished had never happened. The interview. It started with a phone call from Public Affairs. A soft-spoken lieutenant asked if she'd agree to a filmed interview. "Command wants to document the Fallujah operation," he said, "for training, for inspiration." Maria hesitated. The word inspiration didn't sit right. Still, she agreed, not for them, but for the people who wouldn't be there to tell their part. 2 weeks later, the camera lights hummed in the small recording room. The interviewer, a civilian journalist with kind eyes, smiled gently. "Whenever you're ready, Sergeant Santos." Maria sat straight, her uniform immaculate, her scars hidden beneath fabric and discipline. She took a breath, then another. Her voice came out steady but quiet. "I remember the dust first, and how quiet it was before it started. That's the part people never believe, how peace always comes before disaster." The journalist nodded, letting her continue. "I heard the explosion, I didn't see it, just felt the air leave my body, The next thing I knew, I was running. Her hands tightened unconsciously, knuckles whitening. I didn't think about the bullets. I didn't think about dying. I just thought they need me, that's all. The camera caught her pause. That moment her eyes drifted, her voice almost breaking. They say I took 11 rounds. I don't remember the number. I just remember the sound of someone breathing beside me and knowing that if I stopped, that sound would stop too. The journalist whispered, "Why did you keep going?" Maria looked at her directly, the weight of it in her gaze. Because that's what medics do. We don't choose who lives or dies. We just keep trying until someone tells us to stop. The silence that followed was heavier than words. When the interview ended, the crew thanked her. She nodded politely, stood, and walked out without looking back. Later that night, sitting in her quarters, she deleted the message the lieutenant had sent, the one saying her story would go viral, that it would boost morale. She didn't need the world to know her name. She just needed to remember the ones who never came home. The letter. A week later, a letter arrived, paper, not email. The handwriting was neat, careful, deliberate. It was from Private First Class Anya Lopez, one of her students. "Ma'am, we just finished our trauma course, and I wanted to thank you. When you told us that courage isn't about running into fire, it's about staying there long enough to pull someone out, that stuck with me. I'm deploying next month. I'm scared, but I keep thinking of you, how you didn't quit. If I can do half of what you did, I'll be proud of myself. Respectfully, PFC Lopez." Maria read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't fill the silence, they reshaped it. For the first time in months, she smiled without forcing it. Not because of pride, but because she'd finally seen the point of her survival. It wasn't to inspire headlines. It was to make sure someone else carried the torch forward, someone who might need the courage she once borrowed from herself. The visit. Spring came quietly to Texas. Wildflowers scattered across the training fields, wind carrying the scent of grass and aviation fuel. Maria took a weekend trip to Arlington. The cemetery was still, endless rows of white marking lives that had once echoed like hers. She found Rodriguez's men, the ones who hadn't made it out of Fallujah. She stood for a long time at their graves, her uniform perfect, her stance military sharp. But when she spoke, it wasn't with ceremony. It was soft, human. "You'd laugh if you saw me now, standing here like I'm made of stone. I still hate hospitals, still can't stand fireworks." Her voice trembled slightly. "But I kept my promise. They lived, both of them. You didn't die for nothing." The wind moved through the trees, a low whisper like breathing. She lifted her hand in a slow salute, held it there until her vision blurred. Then she lowered it, turned, and walked away without looking back. The night drive. On the drive back, she turned off the radio and let the quiet fill the space. The desert sky stretched wide and endless, a mirror of the one she'd bled under. Headlights cut through the darkness, and for a moment she imagined they were helicopter beams again. The thought didn't scare her anymore. It almost comforted her, a reminder of what endurance had bought her. She rolled down the window, letting the dry air whip through her hair. Freedom, she realized, wasn't the absence of pain. It was the choice to keep moving despite it. When the base lights came into view on the horizon, she whispered to the night, "I made it." And for once, she didn't mean it as an apology. The return to purpose. Months later, she stood before a new class of recruits, men and women barely out of high school. Some smiled nervously, others stared at her medals like relics from another world. She didn't talk about the bullets. She didn't talk about the pain. She talked about choices. "How many of you think bravery is not being afraid?" she asked. A few hands went up. Maria nodded slowly. "You're wrong." Silence fell. Bravery is being afraid and doing it anyway. It's crawling through blood when your body says stop. It's hearing your own heartbeat and realizing you still have work to do. No one moved. Her words hung there, not loud but heavy. She let them sit, then smiled faintly. That's what being a medic means. You carry the weight no one else can, and sometimes you save them by refusing to die first. A hush followed, but this time it wasn't fear. It was respect, quiet, reverent, real. The flashback. That night's sleep came easily. But dreams didn't. She was back there again, the street, the dust, the wreck. Only this time, everything was still. No gunfire, no pain, just silence. She saw herself lying there, broken, unmoving. And for the first time, she didn't see weakness. She saw strength, defiance made flesh. A figure approached, a shadow familiar. Morrison. He knelt beside her, just like before. "You did your part," he said softly. "You can rest now." She nodded, and when she woke, there were tears on her cheeks, not from sorrow but from release. The speech. 2 years after Fallujah, she was invited to speak at a ceremony, the unveiling of a memorial for medics lost in combat. Hundreds gathered, cameras, officials, families. When her name was called, she stepped to the podium. The crowd rose, not in applause but in silence. She took a breath, steady and calm. "I don't stand here because I'm brave," she began. "I stand here because others were. Because every time I fell, someone lifted me up, even when they were bleeding too." She looked out over the crowd, faces she didn't know, but stories she understood. "People ask how I survived 11 bullets. The truth is, I didn't do it alone. I did it for them." Her voice softened. Courage doesn't always look like charging forward. Sometimes it looks like staying still, holding pressure on a wound, whispering to someone that it's going to be okay, even when you're not sure it is. She paused. The breeze moved through the flags behind her. "Fallujah taught me that survival isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's the decision to keep going when neither makes sense anymore." Then quieter. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." No applause followed. Only silence, deep, powerful, sacred. The kind that says, "We heard you." Closing moment. That night back in her quarters, Maria placed the silver star on her desk. It glimmered faintly under the lamplight, a symbol of something she couldn't quite name. Next to it she laid the letter from PFC Lopez, now creased from reading. Then she opened her window. Outside, the wind carried the faint hum of engines from the airfield, helicopters lifting into the night. She stood there for a long time, watching their lights fade across the horizon. Not with sadness, not with longing, but with gratitude. Because she finally understood, her war wasn't over, but it had changed. It wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about teaching others how. And in that quiet realization, Maria Santos, the medic who took 11 rounds and refused to die, finally exhaled. For the first time since Fallujah, she was home. What if the only way to make peace with your past was to walk straight back into it? Maria Santos didn't plan on returning to Iraq. For years, she'd told herself that part of her life was over, that she'd left her ghosts buried under the dust of Fallujah. But ghosts, she'd learned, had a way of finding you anyway. It started with a letter from the Department of Defense. A request. Advisory support for field medic training, Joint Coalition Forces, Al-Assad Air Base, Iraq. She stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Her hand trembled as she read. 8 days, temporary deployment, civilian contractor status. Not combat, not active duty. But still Iraq. She folded the letter neatly, set it aside and sat very still. The room was quiet except for the slow hum of her ceiling fan. And beneath that faint, almost imperceptible, the phantom echo of rotor blades from another lifetime. She could have said no. No one would have blamed her. But that night, as she stood by her window watching the Texas sunset fade to desert gold, she realized something. She wasn't afraid of going back. She was afraid of what she'd feel when she did. Return. The air hit her the moment she stepped off the plane. Dry, familiar, heavy with memory. Al-Assad had changed. Newer runways, newer hangars, cleaner sky. But the smell of sand and diesel hadn't. Neither had the silence between wind gusts. A young lieutenant greeted her at the airfield. "Ma'am, it's an honor," he said, eyes wide. "We studied your mission in training, Fallujah 2004. Maria offered a polite nod. The number still stung when she heard it. 20 years ago. He led her through the compound, past rows of armored vehicles, medical tents, and fresh-faced soldiers who looked too young to be standing on foreign soil. Most of them weren't even born when that happened, he said with a faint laugh. Maria smiled, but her eyes drifted to the horizon. The land looked the same. Unforgiving, endless. The classroom. Her assignment was simple: train Iraqi and U.S. medics together on trauma response in active combat zones. To teach them how to keep someone alive when the world around them was falling apart. The first day she stood before 20 trainees, a mix of uniforms, accents, and eyes that all carried the same question: who is she? She began not with instructions, but with a story. "I'm not here to teach you how not to get shot," she said. "That's someone else's job. I'm here to teach you what to do when it happens anyway." A ripple of laughter, nervous but real. She continued. "You'll feel fear, that's normal. You'll want to run, that's human. But when someone's bleeding in front of you, that fear has to wait. You focus on the next breath, the next heartbeat, theirs, not yours." Her tone was calm, deliberate, almost meditative. The trainees leaned forward, as if drawn by gravity. She demonstrated tourniquet use, field triage, evacuation coordination. But woven between the lessons were stories, fragments from Fallujah, told not for shock, but for meaning. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "you save them, sometimes you don't. But every time you try, that matters." When the class ended, one of the Iraqi medics approached her, hand over his heart. "You speak like someone who has seen death," he said softly, "but you speak with peace." Maria smiled faintly. "Peace is a choice," she said. "Sometimes you have to fight to keep it." The ghost town. 2 days into her assignment, the liaison officer asked if she'd like to visit Fallujah. The new stabilization mission had cleared parts of the old city, rebuilding schools, clinics, homes. Maria hesitated. Fallujah. The word still had weight, like a scar that hadn't quite faded. But curiosity, or maybe courage, won. She nodded. The drive was quiet. The convoy rolled past long stretches of barren land, ghost villages half swallowed by sand. And then the city. It wasn't what she remembered. The streets were cleaner, buildings rebuilt, children running with kites made of plastic bags. But beneath it all, she could still feel the bones of the old city, the one she'd bled in. They stopped at what was once a small medical post near the old market district. The structure was barely standing, its walls scarred by time and bullets. Maria stepped out slowly, boots crunching on dry earth. For a long time she just stood there. The wind shifted. And suddenly, memory. The sound of chaos. The smell of smoke. The faces of men she'd saved, and the ones she hadn't. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened, but she didn't fall. Instead, she whispered, "I'm back." A soft voice broke her trance. "Ma'am," the liaison stood a few feet away, uncertain. She nodded once. "Just remembering." She knelt by the rubble, tracing her fingers along the dust. Her hand stopped on a small piece of metal, half-buried, dull, forgotten. A spent shell casing. She turned it over in her palm. It felt heavier than it should have. She didn't keep it. She placed it back where she found it, pressed her fingers to the ground, and whispered, "Rest." The encounter. That evening back at the base, a soldier knocked on her door. "Ma'am, there's someone here asking for you." Outside stood a man in civilian clothes, maybe early 40s. Dark hair, weathered face, eyes that held both kindness and years. "You don't remember me," he said in accented English, "but I remember you." Maria frowned. "I was interpreter with Marines 2004. I was there, Fallujah. You were hit. You told me to help carry your wounded." The image flickered back. A younger man with fear in his eyes and blood on his hands, helping her drag Johnson behind cover. Her breath caught. "I remember," she said softly. "You saved lives that day." He smiled faintly. "I saved them because you told me not to stop." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small medallion, tarnished but recognizable. A St. Michael pendant. "You dropped this," he said. "I kept it all these years, thought maybe it was time to give it back." Maria stared at it, the same medal her mother had given her before deployment. She hadn't even realized it was gone. She took it gently, her throat tightening. "Thank you." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "No, thank you. You made me believe courage is quiet." When he left, she sat alone for a long time, the pendant resting in her palm. Outside, the wind hummed softly against the barracks, the same sound it made the night the SEALs found her. The reflection. Her final night in Iraq, Maria couldn't sleep. She walked out to the edge of the airfield, where the lights faded into desert black. The stars were sharp, infinite. She stood there, listening not to engines or voices, but to the silence between them. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was kind. In the distance, she could just make out the faint shimmer of Fallujah's skyline, rebuilt, alive, enduring. She closed her eyes and spoke quietly, not to anyone living or dead, but to the part of herself she'd left there 20 years ago. "You did what you had to. You can rest now." The wind moved through her hair, warm and steady. She smiled small, real, unforced. The departure. When the plane lifted off the next morning, Maria looked out the window as the city shrank below her. She didn't cry this time. There was nothing left to mourn. She touched the pendant around her neck and exhaled slowly. The war hadn't taken her. It had shaped her. And now, finally, she could let it go. Hours later, as the plane crossed into clear blue sky, she whispered softly to herself, "It's over." But she knew it wasn't really the end. Because some wars never end. They just become quieter, softer, easier to carry. The message. A week after returning to Texas, she found an email in her inbox. From PFC Lopez, now deployed in Syria. "Ma'am, I thought you should know we had contact last night. Took casualties, but your training saved a man's life. We used your method just like you said. One breath, one heartbeat. It worked. Thank you for teaching us how not to stop. Lopez." Maria smiled, tears rising uninvited. She replied simply, "You did what you were trained to do. I'm proud of you. Stay safe." When she hit send, she sat back, staring at the ceiling. The world had come full circle, from the dust of Fallujah to the promise of a new generation who understood that courage wasn't loud. It was patient, persistent, quiet. She closed her laptop and whispered into the stillness, "Keep them safe." The realization. Later that night, Maria stood outside her quarters again, looking up at the same Texas sky she'd left months earlier. Different stars, same silence. But this time it did ache. It felt right. She understood now that her purpose hadn't ended on the battlefield. It had evolved from saving lives with her hands to saving hearts with her story. And though she would never forget the 11 rounds, the days of bleeding, or the ghosts that walked beside her, she no longer feared them. They were part of her, not as wounds but as witnesses. She whispered, almost smiling, "Sometimes the war ends when you stop fighting yourself." Then, somewhere far off, a helicopter passed across the horizon, its rotors whispering through the night. She watched it until it vanished, her reflection faint in the glass, her heart calm at last.